very good afternoon to all of the esteemed audience and to our panelists. This panel will be around 5G, the opportunity and the monetization of 5G. Where is it, the progress, where are we with spectrum and how we can enable it more, how we can have more sustainable ROI. Around the subject, I was thinking, going back in memory, and I'll share this for a minute actually. 25 plus years back, I was a research student in Michigan, in the US, and my research thesis were around something called frequency selective services. For many of you, they'll identify them as the new generation of antennas. The era then was the era of what I call 1.5G, not 5G. And we were looking into, we looked into the network as a living network. You know, the evolution will take us from, if you look at a network as a matter, from solid state to gaseous state. By gaseous, I mean the infiltration, the wild infiltration of these antennas, and going into amorphous than gaseous state where there will be a huge infiltration. The only thing then, the intelligence on these antennas was still missing. 25 years later, all the enablers, I believe, are there. And I think this is the era of 5G, and it is very promising. So around that, I will start my first question, and I will address it initially to Mr. Nawaf joining us, if he's joining us virtually. And then we'll go through the panelists. So the first question is, the 5G is opening new opportunities for monetization. Mr. Nawaf, what are the significant animals that could affect this? What do you believe are the drivers? And what measures can be done to ensure the sustainability in terms of a steady ROI growth over the years? What do you believe are the growth rates from an operator perspective? And are we looking at a disruptive or as an additive revenue in the short term and the long term?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you for having me in this panel. I hope my voice is clear. That's a very important strategical question. Concerns CTOs and concerns CFOs at the same time. For the early adopters, mobile operators, 5G is an addition to whatever legacy network they are providing today. For us in Zain, since we are one of the pioneering mobile operators launching 5G, the battle was on broadband and speed. Who gets the footprint of 5G first in order to grab the market? At the early stage before the pandemic, before the COVID pandemic, the main challenge is that whoever can grab the consumer market in a very dominantly mobile broadband markets here in this region. What we have discovered during the course of deploying 5G is that a new revenue stream has been created from the technology itself, which is fixed wireless access. 5G as a technology enabled better experience for mobile devices, but for us, especially in Zain, it opened the window for grabbing the opportunity of the fixed wireless market, which is probably dominated by the fixed operators in this region. So at the early stages, 5G was an addition to the 4G network that we had, or the more broadband networks that we used to operate. Today, we look at it from a different perspective. In order to continue and sustain the investment on 5G technologies and maintain the leadership in the market, we need to find new revenue streams. And one of the biggest challenges that we have is that are these countries that we operate in, the markets that we operate in, are ready from an economical and industrial point of view to grab the benefits that the 5G enables or no? That's the biggest question we have. And I think that without let's say, the involvement of big players like the governments and regulators in terms of steering the markets towards adopting technology trends, the exact practical value of 5G cannot be monetized. So this is one dimension. The other dimension is what can 5G enable for us in terms of new technologies that will enhance the digital transformation of the operations and the markets that we operate on. And this also includes the collaboration of all the players in the region. I think the notation of a mobile operator who used to deploy a blanket service for all the consumer to use and monetize is a history for us. Now we need to look at these vertical and niche markets and try to liaison and coordinate with big players like the governments, the real spenders, in order to influence the technology direction and ensure the sustainable investment that we'd like to achieve.
Thank you very much. I'll pass again to the second operator, Hani, representing Etisalat. Maybe you can give us also that opinion before we move to the vendors, please.
Thank you very much. So far as the other gentleman has presented before me, the focus has been on the consumer side, focusing on EMBB, enhanced mobile broadband, fixed wireless access, as Mr. Nawaf has mentioned just now. So there is a big focus right now for consumer perspective on these two aspects of monetization of 5G. And this comes natural because these are the two main use cases when 5G came about on release 15, they were talking about. However, we're looking at things now, and I believe that 5G now is still in the linear deceptive stage, and we have not reached the exponential disruptive stage on 5G. I'll give you some examples. A lot of work has been already done on the concepts such as metaverse, which will drive a huge adoption of data traffic across a digital universe that is being built. People are having, actually investing in a digital life, so that will generate a lot of traffic and applications that we still, uncovering, and we have not reached that level of maturity on the application yet, but I believe they're coming. And that huge traffic will need something like 5G to handle this amount of traffic. On the latency side, concepts such as Web3, which requires very strict latency requirements to manage all of these crypto tokens and blockchains that are being created for this environment. So I believe we're still scratching the surface of 5G monetization in terms of the consumer perspective. Our children now are digital born or digital native. Within a few years, they're going to be adults, and those guys will generate all of these new applications and traffic that we can monetize for 5G. On the enterprise side, we're still experimenting in the business model and how we can address the enterprise segment. It requires a lot of change from our side as CSPs. I can consider it as major transformation from managing one monolithic public network that serves everybody to managing a fair number of enterprise and private networks with SLA driven requirements. So we're still in the beginning of the journey. Some operators have monetized 5G in different ways, and we can see already the uplift in ARPU and the increase of traffic that 5G is generating. But I don't think we have reached to the level where we can say we are satisfied with the level of monetization that 5G potentially can generate.
I'll move to the Zoran on Ericsson. I think there is lots of good thought and progress on how you look into 5G and how to monetize it. So what's your view there, please?
No, I think this is a good point that first way of monetization will be consumer-based offerings. I mean, this is very much logical. I mean, this is business as usual. This is something which operators do very well. So we think that this is going to be the first way, and there is a lot to monetize there. There was a report from Ericsson harnessing consumer 5G potential, where we're estimating that 2.7% year-on-year growth until 2030 in consumer-related offerings. But we are distinguishing between proactive approach and passive approach. And what we are saying when we say proactive approach is, of course, super good coverage is required with mid-band, a lot of capacity, a lot of throughput, latency, but that's not sufficient. After you get these first techie customers, getting above 200, 300 megabits per second is not enough. You need to bundle this with appropriate use cases. Augmented reality, virtual reality. So we have these front runners who are doing that successfully. And this is the customers who are going to see that a big growth, I would say, because we are starting from big base. So this is the main revenue stream at the moment. On the other side is industry-related offerings. And this is, of course, something which needs to be developed. But again, growth is much higher. Expectation is that 12% year-on-year growth will be in this area. So this is something, and starting from the smaller base now, but reaching 35% of additional revenue on top of the revenue which from the consumer by 2030. So this is something which we need to address, and that's a challenge. Technology, I think, is there. Maybe on the organizational side, addressing go-to-market model is a little bit more challenging. What we are advising customers is to have focus strategy, to select cluster of use cases which has the similar capabilities, similar requirements, similar go-to-market model, and then to learn from other. So to start with one, take the knowledge, go to other use case, and then develop further.
Thank you. Maybe we have your opinion as well, please.
Thank you. I think like all the gentlemen raises a good point. And when you look at the revenue, return of revenue investment, you had to look at both the 2C and 2B side. Mm-hmm. So because as the TM Forum predicted that 50% of revenue from 5G will come from the business side. Mm-hmm. So on the 2C side, which is consumer market, which is still bread and butter for lots of the mobile operators. So in Middle East, we have seen a very fast deploy of 5G. Lots of operators grab the early market. It's a huge increase on the ARPU. Mm-hmm. It's very good. So next step is looking at how to migrate users onto 5G. Mm-hmm. That's the three things you need to think about, how to make your 5G product stand out, how to position that. Because the general consumers don't care the technology aspect of that. They want to know the experience of that. They want to know what they can get the best out of 5G. So you need to make your product stand out. For that, for example, in China Mobile, China Mobile, they deployed the 5G product, which is aiming for the high users, which gamers, they require the high-end devices, fast speed, and low latency. Yes. Now, coming to the second point, you need to use the attribute of the 5G, low latency, high bandwidth, support the gaming, live streaming, that kind of high-value customers to develop as a product. Mm-hmm. The third thing that we're talking about is flexible offer. So these things still hold the key to attract the users. I mean, if you have, because the 5G is such a high-value package, if you still fix your users under 24 months contract, that will put people off to think about to sign the contract. Then the other aspect, like lots of the gentlemen highlight, is to move into the content domain, which change from connectivity to content, using the AR, using the VR, which previously you can't really do that with the 4G. Mm-hmm. But on that point, you need to work with the content providers, make sure there's always a content, high value, attractive content available. It's not just a one-off shot, which means people bought the devices, they played for a couple of days, and are no longer interested in adopting your package. Mm-hmm. On the 2B side, so this is, as a gentleman said, it's still early stage, lots of things to be done from the capability perspective. But more important for us, based on the experience we had in China, we did China 5G industry developed very fast. Mm-hmm. Is that to choose the right industry. In that respect, you've got to look at it, because not all the industry ready for this 5G technology themselves is still learn what 5G is about, what can help them to achieve their own digital transformation. Mm-hmm. And in that respect, they have multiple dimensions in digital transformation. So from the telco perspective, you need to decide what is the right industry to work with. There's three things needed to look at. One is the willingness, if there's and the demand of the industry. Second thing, is it technically feasible? The third thing, what kind of roles are you going to play when you work with the industry? And the other things, once you have the solution deployed, can you replicate in the larger scale, which means what kind of business case you should develop for. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to think about in that domain. So both on the 2C side, 2B side, different methodology to take, different focus points. Yeah.
Thank you, May. Very quickly to AJ, and then I'll skip you, Fahmi, for the next question. I'll move to Ayham after, and then we pose the next question. So over to you, AJ, please.
Thank you. I think, like everybody mentioned in the panel, I think it's all about the use cases. Everything is about that. But at the end of the day, how do we really create the ecosystem for making the use cases? Mm-hmm. Because it's not about a single player who will create the use case. It's an entire set of stakeholders coming from the devices, sensors, and the cost of the sensors, and the network infrastructure providers, the operators, the enterprises, and all of them. So this is, it's all about that. But let me also highlight couple of points from the network point of view. Of course, we don't need to talk about spectrum because it's given, because it's a mandatory thing, because you need to have the right spectrum strategy, because low band to mid band to high band, otherwise this cannot play, because you need to create the use cases related to low latency or high throughput, depending on what you want. Then we need to move forward from the existing infrastructure, what we have in the network architecture, from the 5G non-standalone, which is the fundamental architecture which we have developed, and it has to move to the standalone architecture to create the best use of this 5G potential, because it's all about low latency, 5G standalone, which brings in, and that enables the platform for network slicing, because network slicing, which will help the operators or even the enterprises to allocate the physical infrastructure in a logical way and allocate only the resources what is needed, especially for cloud gaming, you need lowest latency. Of course, you can give a slice for that, but for other use cases where you require only a low throughput, then you don't need to provide a big chunk of resources for that. So this would help. So and the fourth element which I would add is about the edge cloud. We need to probably put more focus on these edge cloud use cases. How do we enable that? Because that will monetize with multi-access edge computing use cases, what we talk about. So all of this, definitely there is a long way to go, to create the use cases and monetize all of this.
Thank you. Ayham?
I think if you hear each one of our esteemed panelists today and what they've talked about, it resonates quite nicely with what the messaging that we've heard from a lot of the customers and operators across the region. So there's not really so much to add, but one thing that I'd like to bring to the table, and we didn't really hear about it today, is with 5G, and I think May, you said it earlier, 50% of revenues are anticipated to be coming from the enterprise side. So really the return, the ROI is a very important subject, and where we look at. And I think you mentioned earlier that you're still at the very beginning of the journey, and a lot of the operators are at the same position. It's still at the very beginning of the journey. So ROI does play a very important part. And one of the things that we try and discuss in forums like this and with customers and with our partners is two parts of this. One is the legacy way of deployment. Going through the siloed approach. How do you leverage more of a horizontal platform? How do you leverage investment across not just one service, but across multiple services? I think that's an important factor. How do you introduce automation from day zero, not down the journey? Because when we look at ROI, it's not only ROI at the beginning of the deployment, but it's maintaining a consistent positive ROI across your whole journey, if you want to think about that. So these are really two things. And then the other side is the people side. Where a lot of the focus needs to be on where does the process fit in, because it's not just about upskilling people, which is very important, but it's having the right partnerships between operators, between enterprises, because it's 50% of the revenue is supposed to be coming from there. But also, where does government play a role? So these are all very important aspects that we try and sort of push the message across.
Okay, great. Second question is around strategy of 5G and what is the thought process behind it? And why is it crucial to choose the right 5G business model at the onset, particularly for telcos? I'll get two vendors also to answer. Femi, sorry for keeping you late, but we'll start with Nawaf since he's with us virtually. So, Mr. Nawaf, can you kindly answer to what Zain's strategy is for 5G and the mindset behind it, please?
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to do that. Before we find the best strategy, we need to find the best partner to build the 5G network. So you need to have the fundamentals first. This is the first building block of the strategy. Now, there is a confusion here between what the technology providers think the future is and what the actual market is. So this created some dilemma on how do we have the marriage between the technology direction and the exact situation in the markets. So our strategy is, instead of only building the good network and putting it in the market and products will be created on top of it, whether for enterprise or consumer, today we are in the business of creating the demand itself. It's not enough for us to provide the technology and wait for the market to adapt and understand. And the second most important thing, we cannot, in order for us to monetize, we cannot wait for industries to be created surrounding us in order to serve them. We need to create these industries. So a big part of our thinking daily is how do we create that industry demand in the countries that we operate in? Because if we say that it is industry 4.0, but if you look at this region, where is the industry? It's focused in certain markets. So what about these groups of operators who decided to go to 5G? Should we wait for the industry to start, or should we create the industry itself? That's the biggest question in terms of our strategy. The third pillar of the strategy is if we promise AI, machine learning, automation, we need to start doing it in our network first in order for the value to be created from within, either from a return on investment point of view, from OpEx saving point of view, from efficiency point of view, and from knowledge and skills point of view. So we need to start doing that. The biggest obstacle we have reached is that we have seen the past 2 years is that yes, we have partnered with good technology vendors, but our backbone system, the BSS, the back-end systems that we have could not adapt for that technology and could not enable the business to create specific products or segmentations that will allow us to segment the network based on needs, not based on mass. So this is in general the summary of our strategy.
Thank you. Femi, maybe you put some comments on that as well?
Yeah.
CommScope's strategy.
Thank you very much. So, does it occur to anyone that we haven't heard expressions or phrases like connect the next billion or driverless cars? 2 years ago when we were on this panel, there was a bigger variety of opinions into what 5G might deliver or not deliver. That's certainly converged. We're almost all saying the same thing on this panel. And that's because it's expensive. There was talk about $1 trillion from now till 2025, of which 80% will go into 5G. And that amount of money, that CapEx, is generated from today's revenues. So it isn't an endless pot, and reality has to set in. And that's what is happening. And I'm pleased to see that happen. So that's my first comment. Second is that then breaks your deployment strategy into what am I going to do with the amount of money I have. The first one is I look at my consumer base and I say, for every dollar I try to extract from my Mr. Consumer X, he's going to demand a little bit more innovation, a little bit more throughput, a little bit more better latency, better quality of service. What am I doing to provide that? And I got to think about that, and that's just back to basic engineering, right? The second is 5G does provide a real opportunity where there's a lack of infrastructure. Zain, do, that. Surprisingly, even in richer countries, 5G is used for fixed wireless access. Think of what that will do in much of the rest of the Middle East and in Africa. There's a huge potential there where 5G just brings infrastructure where there was a lack. And then thirdly is the one we talked about, which is verticals. You know, we've all said that, and I agree 100%. You have to address a vertical and bring a solution to the market in that way, whether it be healthcare, education, mining, whatever it may be. So I think those things inform what the strategy needs to be. Cloud, AI, and strictly 5G, those trends have been there, and 5G is an enabler for those things. You got to go back to your network level and say, okay, I'm going to break it down into my problem areas, and then I'm going to deploy knowing that this is the best way to have the best return on investment.
Okay, thank you. Over to Hani. For Etisalat also, that strategy, how is it forming or shaping?
Yeah, of course. I mean, our strategy is in line with what Mr. Nawaf just mentioned. I mean, we have to do investment in a very smart way. It's not like you build 5G and then they will come. You have to generate demand. You have to understand your customers. You have to understand, the device penetration, 5G device penetration in your markets. You have to understand how users are using 5G, where they're using 5G, and based on that, you adjust your strategy accordingly. So it's like a closed loop, feedback loop between technical functions and commercial functions, so that we are always tweaking our deployment strategy according to where the demand is and according to our forecast in terms of consumer or enterprise. One very important aspect is the ROI, as some people mentioned. We have to look at ROI not just for like today or tomorrow. We have to look at it for 5 years, 10 years, where we're going in terms of ROI. We have to do things in a much smarter way in terms of optimizing our capex. We're looking at things, for example, on the hardware side. We have to be, the hardware has to be, future-proof, so that we move from hardware-dependent networks to more software-dependent networks with the new features that are coming. We don't want to go and retrofit our hardware in 2 years or 3 years. We're looking at things like, for example, on the radio side, multi-band radios. We're looking at massive MIMOs. All of these technologies that will enable us to maximize the return on investment on the capex, so that we can optimize our capex accordingly. We're looking at different deployment models. For example, active network sharing. We're doing it in the UAE, for example. So we're looking at the different models: Open RAN, Cloud RAN, where we're moving the network architecture from a distributed architecture to more centralized architecture, where we can shift the capacity from different areas on the baseband. So all of these things that we're doing on the capex is helping and is important to maximize our ROI. On the OpEx, for example, automation is very key, as Ayham was saying. We have to drive automation in our network in a very big way. We cannot keep operating the network in the same way. So automation is very important for us, so that we can also increase the efficiency on the OpEx as well.
Okay, thank you. Closing on this second question, Ayham, maybe you want to briefly.
I think you summarized it quite well, actually. If I was to add anything to that, is to talk about, you talked about how we changed some of the ways that we've been traditionally doing things. It's all about being very agile, being able to meet the customer requirement today, being able to meet the customer requirement tomorrow without knowing what the requirement is. And I think, if you talk about 5G, the way that we see that 5G is built, it's built based on a services-based architecture. It's all about being cloud native. So, if you take virtue of those design principles, it's about how quickly you can go to market. It's about how much you can scale. It's about being okay to fail. Being able to fail quickly and then be able to readjust and repurpose your current investment, your current technology to meet changing requirements is crucial. And if you don't have the right strategy to be able to accommodate that, then that really will impact the growth or the journey of your 5G rollout over time. The last point I'd like to focus on when we talk about that is really the people point of it. You spoke about our children growing up as hopefully not digital children, but in a digital world. But how do they grow up, and how does their requirements change over the next 10 years? And are we as operators ready to handle the increasing threat of people like Amazon and people like Netflix who right now are just providing content, but what do they provide tomorrow other than content? So where are the operators? Where are we as an industry in preparation and readiness for that?
Thank you, Ayham. My third question actually is around IoT, a very catchy small word, but it carries, I guess, a big premise. Especially when it comes to 5G, it is very promising for high-density IoT deployments. So the question is, and I'll start with Zoran, is what's your measurement of the level of 5G adoption in IoT, for example, now, and how is this going to continue to transform in different industries? Just offline, we were talking about, recently there was an announcement about last week about 3D printing of a villa, interesting enough, in Sharjah, not very far away. And we discussed, this concept of IoTs in terms of control, latency, robotics, and bringing this to newer industries. So can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. So we distinguish first three types of IoT connectivity. It's broadband IoT, it's massive IoT, and it's critical IoT. So broadband and massive IoT, it's possible, of course, on 5G. It's possible also on 4G. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the latest Ericsson mobility report, broadband IoT will take over legacy IoT over 2G and 3G network this year. Mm-hmm. But massive IoT will have the strongest growth. And in this forecasting period, which is until 2027, massive IoT will be, so narrowband and Cat-M1, will be the highest number of connections, 51%. But going back to this critical IoT, this is something which we can do only over 5G. Mm-hmm. Ericsson recently launched our time-critical communication, which is enabling exactly this, to have, it's not enough only to have low latency, it's important to have exact, bounded, constant low latency. Mm-hmm. You said this example of building a villa. I will give you one example from the ports. Very popular, important use case in the ports is controlling these massive cranes. Mm-hmm. You have like 30 meter or something, which is loading containers to the ship. And we have latency now in non-standalone networks. So it's like 20 milliseconds or something. But what's important, that latency needs to be in some area. Mm-hmm. You cannot have in some percentage of time that latency is jumping up, because then that crane is thinking, oh, I'm losing connection. I will go to safe me mode. And you don't want that multi-ton equipment to start moving without control. Yeah. So that's what we're going to see more and more. And then also, of course, particularly going together with 5G standalone networks, mm-hmm. which we are seeing now deployed globally, but also here. We're going to see a number of 5G standalone networks to enable all type of IoT use cases in the industry. What we already see as a momentum is dedicated networks, private networks. We have a number of private networks, dedicated networks for automotive industry in Germany, with Mercedes, BMW. Then we have these big airports in France, then ports in UK. So this is real momentum. And we believe that next year, when we see this 5G standalone, when we see features, ultra-reliable low latency, like time-critical communication, mm-hmm. and when we see, of course, additional ecosystem in devices, industry-related devices, then we're going to really see acceleration of IoT deployment based on 5G in industries.
Perfect. May, maybe you can comment on that as well, please?
Right. I think the whole IoT, the concept is not new anymore, because I started deploy IoT when I was in Ericsson days. That's kind of 10 years ago. But the thing is, over the last decade, we have seen the IoT deployment using different technologies, some proprietary, low spectrum solutions, Sigfox, and also NB-IoT. We'll talk about that. And the smart meters deployment in the UK is a mix of proprietary network and the 3G. But all of those have the kind of challenges. One is to be able to deploy in the mass, and also with the amount of data and the latency requirement to become more stringent, so the current network cannot handle anymore. So statistically speaking, the IoT market itself will account for more money in the next about $40 billion by 2026. That's yield about 72% CAGR between now and 2006. So it's a huge market to capture. And with 5G, of course, you will provide the kind of capacity and the low latency required to deploy IoT solution in the mass. But this is, we still see quite low kind of adoptions of IoT, industrial IoT solution in the vertical sector. Reason for that is this is still evolved kind of solution. One is the solution itself, maturity yet to be developed. The other thing is the 3GPP standard, for example, is only just recently in the release 16 defined the whole series of features like ultra low reliable low latency features, IAB features, industrial IoT features, positioning features, additional on the vehicle to everything features. So all these features were put into the real operational deployment to enable this solution. The second thing is also looking at the maturity of the cloud capability, data analytic, AI capability, unable to manage these devices, being able to have the real-time communication with that. That is yet to become more mature. In this respect, guys like Huawei and of course Ericsson and Nokia, together with lots of operators, still continue working on innovating this solution. Potentially, more and more, we already see the remote surgery using IoT devices is happening, be demonstrated in China and a couple of other countries. More importantly, we see the huge potential with IoT devices for the remote operating the heavy machinery, which we see a lot of the 5G cases being deployed in China. And in some other countries, in Germany, the car manufacturers solutions using this kind of solution. So gradually, with the 5G maturity on the 5G industrial solution, we will see a massive deployment of these kind of user cases.
Okay, very quickly to you, AG, and before I move to Hani. So closing comments on this question.
Yeah, I think my colleagues mentioned here. So it's basically, when we talk about IoT, it started from way back, machine-to-machine communication with ECGSM, we can say. And in LTE era, we had this narrowband IoT. Most of the IoT use cases, as we speak today, they are based on LTE. So from Nokia perspective, we are working with more than 200 enterprises or operators on the different IoT use cases, but majority of them still working on LTE, and some of it are based on the 5G. So why the 5G is not picking up in the same sense as LTE? Because there is also a standardization topic, which she mentioned. So I would highlight one aspect that, because one of the fundamental things in the IoT is the cost of the device. The sensor device, we talk about Industry 4.0, any sort of applications. At the end of the day, the device cost should be pretty much less than $10, for example. But when it comes to 5G today, it is not in that range. It is still above $100 if you talk about any devices or sensors. So there's 3GPP perspective. There are some standardization things which are focused on reducing the complexity, reducing the cost of the devices, which is called a red cap, which is coming in reduced capability. This is what it means. And it's coming in release 16 and release 17 and release 18. So it means it's another 2 to 3 years until we see the cost of the device going down, That would be the kind of insertion point, the turning point in terms of 5G IoT picking up in the massive scale. I'm talking from the low latency use cases, mission critical use cases, etc. Broadband IoT, definitely, it will pick up anyway, because that's standard IoT technology or 5G technology.
Thank you. Just for the brevity of time, I'm going to move to the fourth question, and I'll start with Hani. 5G spectrum auctions have been making the headlines around the world. What's your view on the progress being done for 5G spectrum allocation locally, potentially, and why should regulators avoid delays in this process?
Yeah, thanks. So this, the question of spectrum I've been discussing for the past 10 years almost, especially about the 5G spectrum, and it has been long discussions in the ITU and WRCs and among the different regulators globally. And as it stands now, of course, different countries and different regions, they are at different maturity level in terms of providing not just any spectrum. I mean, we're not talking about just any spectrum for 5G. 5G spectrum has to be enough because, if you're providing just a narrow bandwidth of spectrum for 5G, it's not going to buy you much because you can use LTE, sufficiently when it comes to narrow spectrum. For 5G to work very well, you have to have very wide bandwidth spectrum. You have to provide, spectrum in a different bands, low band, mid bands, and high bands, so that you can address, coverage, indoor penetration, capacity. And of course, you have to provide spectrum in a cost-effective way for the operators to be able to buy that spectrum and at the same time invest in rolling out the 5G network. And so, if we spend, all of our money on buying spectrum, then we'll not have any more money for deploying the network. So regulators, they have to have a balance between those two things. And I think regional regulators have been very successful in doing so, especially in the UAE and Saudi Arabia in striking this balance where, for example, in Saudi Arabia, they reduced the price of the 5G spectrum. In return, they put very stringent quality of service requirements on the deployment of the network, 5G network, so that they encourage the operators to invest more on the 5G infrastructure rather than spending more on the spectrum pricing. So I think there is a mixed bag of success, but I think as a Gulf region, we are in a very good position in terms of spectrum availability across the different bands and in terms of the balance between spectrum price and the cost of network deployment.
Okay, and maybe if Nawaf is with us still, maybe he confirms this for Zain, if he doesn't mind to comment on that, please.
Yeah, sure. Very shortly, I totally agree with the comments from Hani. Very well said. This is a big challenge between us and the regulators going forward. But in order, if I would like to say it, if I would like to see a change in the way regulators do these auctions, since we have public consultations for almost 50% of our market happening today, and we are engaged with the regulators, is that the same comment said by Hani that the spectrum needs to be sufficient and needs to serve the purpose of allocating it. This is very important for 5G. The second part, which I would like to see a change in, is that regulators should not look at spectrum as a scarce resources that needs to be distributed equally and fairly between operators. Spectrum is an enabler. The same thing we see 5G as an enabler for industries and solutions. Spectrum is also an enabler for that. And the regulators should look at the bigger picture of the countries that they are regulating, what are the industries and what are the strategical directions their governments are taking, and offering the spectrum as a solution for operators to help that strategy. If this full picture is formulated, then it's easy discussion whether we need the spectrum or we don't need the spectrum. And based on the size of the industry, the spectrum is priced. It's not that, well, this is 5G, you need 100 meg and you pay me this amount of money, the same way, the two-dimensional way that we need to do. Regulators need to understand their market first, their government strategies, their government direction and initiatives, and build that strategy around it and offer it to the operators in order to serve that strategy, not to serve only consumers. And that's my point.
Thank you. Zoran Eriksson is doing lots of good work on this aspect, and maybe we shed some light also about Africa and what you're doing, the good things that you were telling me on your deal with the
Yes.
African Union. So can you comment on that?
Very good. Yes, thank you. Thank you for mentioning this and asking. And I want to reflect here first on GCC. I mean, you're saying auction, and I think, and it was mentioned already here, I mean, GCC is example, I mean, how it was a good job done when it comes to spectrum allocation. I mean, it's all operators having 200 megahertz plus when it comes to, and it's only in the mid-band. I mean, you're talking not on millimeter wave, but in the mid-band when it comes to deployments. Now in Saudi, they're moving needle forward. Expected that very soon we're going to have auctions with 300 probably plus megahertz in the mid-band allocated to operators, plus something which can be done in millimeter wave. So it's really example globally how the job is done when it comes to spectrum. But you are right, it's not the same success everywhere. And in Africa, many things need to be done. What Ericsson did, we signed an MOU with African Telecommunication Union last year to support this process. This year, we published the first 4 guidelines on spectrum management. It's the first guidelines ATU was ever publishing, really to support a process of 5G allocation. And as Hani was saying, and I fully agree, also this was mentioned, it's not really, it's a lot of devils in the details. It's not really enough to allocate the spectrum. You want this spectrum to be big enough. You want that when they are deploying, when operators are deploying 5G, that they don't put this radios only for 20, 30 megahertz. You want them to use the whole 100 megahertz carrier which we have in mid-band, or even more, because then it's going to be efficient deployment, and that efficient deployment for operators will reflect in efficient offerings to industry and consumers. So this is what we are trying to do. This is what I think it's greatly done in GCC, and this is what we want to see also happening in Africa.
Fantastic. Mei Li, closing comments on this, please.
I think just to echo everyone says, you know, the spectrum auction allocation for 5G generally see a delay globally. Part of that is because of the pandemic. So lots of the countries with their major auctions, they have to cancel or reschedule that for this year. Particularly countries relied on the middle band, which is 3.5 gigahertz. There's a massive delay on that. So in that respect, there's a lot of countries that adopted a different dynamic spectrum sharing, which they started allocated 5G in the low spectrum, and some of in the 2.6 and some of in the 1.8 gigahertz, just to overcome the difficulties, because they need a spectrum to deploy 5G and they need a 5G to capture the market. 5G, of course, with the broad spectrum availability, will provide the capability, capacity for the massive IoT deployment. So we believe all the spectrum should move towards to be allocated for 5G use. Mm-hmm. But having said that, we can see there's a small followers on the millimeter wave spectrum, which is higher band, about above 24 gigahertz. Mm-hmm. Potential reason for that is because it's a high cost of that, and it's a lack of ecosystem that is being developed. That is still areas that need to be developed. We see a good progress, particularly in Middle East in the middle band, and continuously we like to see the 6 gigahertz, which provide 100 megahertz spectrum to be allocated for 5G use as a next step. So would essentially help with the healthy development of 5G.
Okay.
Yeah.
Aji?
I think my panelist mentioned, so I think it's in Middle East, and also Hani mentioned, so at least in Saudi Arabia and UAE, so there is a considerable progress in terms of the spectrum allocation. And in Saudi Arabia, I can see that more than 20 gigahertz of spectrum would be available, including the licensed, unlicensed, and lightly licensed available options. But it's a huge chunk of spectrum. So that's a very good progress. You know, in the same is the case in UAE. There is a good amount of spectrum in the C-band, which helps. Because at the end of the day, you need to have the right spectrum strategy, because you need to have a low band, mid band, and the high band. Because that's the only way you can provide all services of 5G. So this is exactly what is happening in Middle East. I mean, at least this is a good progress. But like Zoran mentioned, I think that Africa is probably we have a challenge, because we definitely have places like South Africa. The spectrum auction hasn't happened probably for the last 14, 15 years. So they are still having the spectrum which is allocated 14 years back. And that is something which is, the networks are congested. They're using all sorts of DSS, dynamic spectrum sharing, all sorts of mechanism, but it's not enough. It's the physics, it doesn't work. So this is definitely important, and we expect that next auction, which is happening, expected to happen in 2022, and similarly in Nigeria and Kenya, Morocco and Egypt, these are the places at least we expect that the 5G spectrum auction would take place next year, which would enable the 5G deployment.
Okay. Femi, I'll close the panel with you. So final comments, please.
Thank you. So I would say actually, thus far, 5G spectrum has come relatively cheaply thus far, if you compare it to 3G or 4G, which were outrageous and almost killed the industry. And long may that continue. If you look at Japan, Korea, Australia, and the Gulf countries, that's been the case, and that's likely the model that other countries will follow. The next big one I suggest would be India, and if India does not overdo it in terms of spectrum costs, then the rest, Egypt, like you mentioned, Nigeria, South Africa, will probably follow suit. There's already indications that they might be more reasonable this time, allowing payments over 30 years and so on for the spectrum licenses and so on and so forth. And why is that important? Because of what goes on the ground in the network. The high bandwidth availability, is available in the high spectrum bands. Well, if you were to deploy 5G in that spectrum and that spectrum only, you would need 10 times the number of cell sites that are available out there. I don't think anybody is building any cell sites, maybe 1%, 2% more than we have today. Hence, you're going to need that mix that you talked about, the low band, medium band, high band. In the dense areas where you find probably your high ARPU subscribers, this millimeter wave comes into play and is cost effective. In the rural areas, if you want equity of 5G access, you're going to need the low band 700. I read an interesting article from you guys that you achieved 148 kilometers distance in one cell between two users. That's going to be necessary if you're going to ever deploy 5G in rural areas. The governments, I believe, realize this, and hopefully we're not going to see what happened with 3G. I think this mix will happen. Most operators have that mix. One thing I'd like to add as well is because of the cost of rollout of 5G, you're seeing consolidation. It's coming this way, westwards as well, but if you look at Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, in the Pacific, in several countries, you're seeing consolidation in order to bring spectrum bands together, bring the network asset together, the physical network. You're seeing tower companies playing a bigger role and so on. And all this would enable the network operator to focus on what they do best and find those use cases, drive innovation, create solutions for verticals that solve problems using 5G.
So just closing, actually now I'm going to come back to me. I'm in the business of digital video streaming. And get us all the spectrum that you can, because you're going to consume a lot of that with low latency video streaming. It's very important, actually. Network slicing. Fantastic ideas, great enablements for a very bright future. So with that, I would like to conclude the presentations and the panel. I thank you all the panelists for their time and great comments, and I open the floor for questions, please. No questions?
There's one.
Yes, please.
Hello. My name is Wissam Eid. I am the head of customer success for SUSE in Middle East. Today, as you know, there's tremendous pressure on being a telco provider. I mean, everybody expects the telcos to be a cloud provider. They expect them to be a system integrator, a digital transformer, an innovator. Tremendous pressure. I'd like to ask a question. So this is the expectations. I'd like to know, where are the telcos today, and I'm sorry, this is not just specifically on the 5G, it's about the telcos in general, on all the services. So where are they today from not just from a technology capability perspective, but from a process, from a structure? I mean, if we look at the traditional process of floating an RFP, looking for a vendor, choosing one, which takes 3 to 6 months, probably when you need to innovate, you need to look at, as what I have mentioned, like failing fast, learning quick. And so where are they today from a structure, from a process, and even from a capability? Thank you.
I guess we'll take brief answers from Hani and Nawaf. Maybe he's addressing the telcos, so maybe you can comment on that, please.
What?
Pardon?
Who's starting? Mr. Nawaf?
Okay.
Nawaf, you still with us, please?
Yeah, sure. Well, my friend, you've just asked the most painful question for any CTO in any telecom organization. That's the biggest challenge. Let me tell you, and it's true, it is true, we are facing this challenge of what do we do and how can we just close the loop of whatever we need to serve. Let me tell you what we are doing. If it is a business opportunity, we find someone who knows the business itself. It not necessarily needs to be done by us. This is the first thing we learned during the pandemic, actually, when we ventured into the e-health or the fintech domains and all these extra domains that we are not comfortable in doing business in. So we find someone, we support him with technology, and he leads the business venture. When it comes to technology, to be true with you, we are dividing ourselves. We are slicing our organizations. Yes, we cannot do everything, but there are people who are specialized. So there are different contracts that are being signed here and there for specialized skills and partners who can do parts of the job. I'll give you an example. When you talk about digital BSS transformation, which is the key element of every operation here in the region, you cannot do everything alone. You need system integrators, you need mediation layers, and you need people who are expert in every domain, especially when it comes to IT and telecom. So yeah, this is a big challenge and it's a nightmare. But I think if you make your organization lean and thin, not necessarily you need to control everything. Give every expert the part that he needs and manage it from top. I think you will achieve some change.
Thank you. Just Hani, maybe quickly we can answer this.
It's definitely a big challenge, as Engineer Nawaf mentioned. Just give you an example. When we're talking about enterprise 5G and IoT, when you're trying to sell any service to a customer, they're going to ask you for 3 things. What problem, are you trying to solve for me? How much is the cost? And who am I going to call, after the service, if I have a problem? If you are ready to answer those 3 questions, then you're ready to go and face the customer and provide a solution. If you're not ready to do this, then you might as well not go and face the customer. So imagine we're trying to do this for many verticals, whether oil and gas, whether utilities, whether agriculture, education, you name the vertical, and provide and we have to position ourselves as expertise, in these verticals to provide these solutions to our customers. Of course, we cannot do this, alone. We have to partner. We have to partner with other, providers, system integrators, back-end, solution providers where we can offload some of the customer service. So all of these, creating a huge challenge for us and a huge load. And we are going through, a fair amount of transformation now at Etisalat to address all of these challenges, whether it's, addressing the vertical challenges, whether addressing the growth challenges, whether reskilling our people inside so that we can address these challenges. So all of these, challenges, are real, and we have to address them, and we are doing that. Of course, it's going to take some time. So we need to focus on the big opportunities right now where we can, scale up very quickly, and then leave that long tail till later, once we are developing more and more skill set and more sales force that can address these opportunities.
Can Can I add also the same
Please,
point?
closing.
No, I think, of course, it will be very important to have innovations from operators, but we don't expect all innovations to come from operators. I mean, I think where is the big revenue potential is to enable innovations by others. So they need to build this platform on which we're going to have innovation. They need to expose these capabilities to APIs to a number of these small, agile companies which will come with all these innovations. Some of this will be, of course, from operators, but there's no pressure on them to do all of this. I think the biggest potential for revenue is this service part, so that they enable others to come to innovation.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I guess that's a good time to branch off for lunch. Thank you so much again, and wish you all a very happy day. Thank you.